They told me I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. My own parents, my own family. They looked me in the eye and said I should be realistic about my future while they poured every dollar, every hope, every dream into my twin brother instead. But here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. It teaches you to fight in silence. And when you finally get your moment to shine, the look on their faces when they realize they backed the wrong horse. That's a moment worth waiting 18 years for. Before we dive into today's story, I have a quick favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in our revenge stories. We drop new videos every single day. Let's get back to the story. My name is Alexandra, and this is my story. Being a twin is supposed to be special. You're supposed to have this built-in best friend, this person who understands you better than anyone else in the world. But when you're constantly living in someone's shadow, being a twin feels more like a cruel joke the universe played on you. From the moment we could walk, Michael and I were compared. Same height, same brown eyes, same stubborn cowlick that drove our mother crazy every picture day. But somehow, in ways I still don't fully understand, the adults in our lives decided he was the smart one and I was just his sister. It started early, really early. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table working on math homework. Michael was struggling with his multiplication tables, getting frustrated and throwing his pencil across the room. I had finished mine in 10 minutes and was already helping him figure out what 7 times 8 was. But when my dad walked into the kitchen, he didn't see me patiently explaining the patterns in the times tables. He saw Michael working hard and me distracting him. "Alexandra, let your brother focus. Why don't you go play with your dolls?" That Christmas, Michael got a microscope and a chemistry set. I got a Barbie dream house. When I asked if I could look through the microscope, my mom laughed and said, "Oh, honey, you wouldn't understand what you're seeing anyway. That's more your brother's thing." But late at night, when everyone was asleep, I'd sneak into his room and look at everything under that microscope. Dead bugs, flower petals, drops of pond water teeming with tiny creatures I didn't have names for but desperately wanted to understand. I'd sit there in the dark, adjusting the focus, watching these invisible worlds come to life, and I'd think, this is it. This is what I want to do forever. School was the worst part. We were in the same grade, often had the same teachers, and the comparisons were relentless. But they were never fair comparisons. When Michael brought home a B+ in biology, my parents celebrated like he'd won the Nobel Prize. "We're so proud of you," they'd gush. "You're going to be such an amazing doctor someday." When I brought home straight A's, silence. Or worse, well, Alexandra has always been good at memorizing things. It's different from really understanding the material like Michael does. I'll never forget sophomore year when we both took AP chemistry. Michael was struggling. I mean really struggling. He'd spend hours on homework that took me 20 minutes. His lab reports were disasters. He couldn't balance equations to save his life. I was acing every test, helping half the class understand concepts our teacher couldn't explain clearly, and even started tutoring underclassmen for extra credit. My teacher, Mr. Hoffman, pulled me aside after class one day. "Alexandra, have you thought about what you want to study in college? Because you have a real gift for this. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've rarely seen a student with your intuitive understanding of chemistry." I practically floated home that day. Finally, someone saw what I could do. Someone recognized that I wasn't just memorizing. I was really getting it, really understanding how molecules danced together, how reactions told stories, how the invisible world worked. I burst through the front door, ready to share the news. "Mom, Dad, guess what Mr. Hoffman said about," but they weren't listening. They were hunched over the kitchen table with Michael, hiring him a chemistry tutor because he was struggling with such an important subject for his pre-med track. When I tried to tell them about Mr. Hoffman's comment, my dad barely looked up. "That's nice, sweetheart. Can you see if Michael needs help organizing his chemistry notes?" The tutor they hired for him, she charged $60 an hour. When I asked if I could get help with calculus, a subject I was actually struggling with, my mom frowned and said, "Can't you just figure it out? You're usually fine on your own." So I did figure it out. I figured everything out on my own. Junior year, when we started talking about college seriously, The family meetings were always about Michael's future. What schools would be best for his pre-med track? What extracurriculars would make him stand out? How could we position him as the well-rounded candidate medical schools were looking for? I wasn't invited to these conversations. I'd hear them through the thin walls of our house, my parents' voices full of excitement and possibility when they talked about Michael's potential. When they talked about me, if they talked about me at all, it was in the context of practical careers. Teaching, maybe, or nursing, since you like science but probably aren't cut out for the pressure of being a real doctor. The breaking point came senior year. We were both serious about applying to medical school, though my parents only knew about Michael's plans. I'd been researching schools for months, carefully saving money from my part-time job at the local bookstore, studying for the MCAT with library books and free online resources. That's when my dad sat us both down for the talk. "Kids, we need to be realistic about finances," he said, spreading out papers on the dining room table. "Medical school applications are expensive. MCAT prep is expensive. We can't afford to do this twice." I felt my stomach drop, but I stayed quiet. I knew what was coming. "Michael, you've always been the one with the mind for medicine. Your mother and I have decided to focus our resources on giving you the best possible shot. We're going to pay for a proper MCAT prep course, hire an admissions consultant, and cover all your application fees." He turned to me with what he probably thought was a kind smile. "Alexandra, I know this might be disappointing, but you need to be realistic about your chances. Medical school is incredibly competitive, and frankly, we don't think it's the right fit for you. Maybe consider nursing school. Or teaching, those are wonderful careers for women." The room was spinning. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Michael was looking down at his hands, not meeting my eyes. He knew this was wrong, but he wasn't going to speak up. He never spoke up for me. "We can't waste money on applications that aren't likely to succeed," my mother added, her voice gentle but firm. "You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw their statistics back in their faces, remind them that I had better grades than Michael, better test scores, better everything. I wanted to tell them about Mr. Hoffman's comments, about the way other teachers lit up when I asked questions, about the research project I'd been working on independently that had caught the attention of a professor at the state university. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. I said, "Of course, I understand." Because I did understand. I understood that they had never seen me as anything more than Michael's supporting character. I understood that no amount of evidence was going to change their minds. And I understood that if I was going to prove them wrong, I was going to have to do it completely on my own. That night, lying in bed listening to my parents excitedly discuss Michael's bright future in the next room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to try to change their minds. I was just going to do it. And I was going to do it better than they ever imagined possible. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment for months. While they were having family meetings about Michael's future, I was researching medical schools on my own. While they were budgeting for his success, I was figuring out how to fund my own dreams. The day after the talk, I walked into 3 different establishments and walked out with 3 different jobs. Mornings, I tutored underclassmen in chemistry and biology at the local community center. $20 an hour, cash. It wasn't much, but these kids were desperate for help, and I was desperate for money. Plus, explaining concepts to struggling students made me realize how deeply I understood the material myself. Afternoons, I waited tables at Giuseppe's, a family Italian restaurant that was always packed with college students. The work was exhausting, 12-hour shifts on weekends, dealing with rude customers, aching feet, hands that smelled permanently of garlic and dish soap. But the tips were decent, and Giuseppe paid me under the table, which meant more money in my pocket. Evenings, I worked online. I'd found this platform where college students would pay for detailed study guides and notes. I'd spend hours creating comprehensive biology and chemistry guides, breaking down complex concepts into digestible pieces. It only paid $10 per guide, but I was cranking out 3 or 4 a week. By November, I was working 60 hours a week on top of maintaining a 4.0 GPA. I was exhausted constantly. There were days I fell asleep in my car between jobs, days I showed up to class with flour in my hair from the restaurant, days I couldn't keep my eyes open during lectures. But every dollar I earned, every tip I pocketed, every payment notification from the tutoring platform, it all went into a mason jar hidden in the back of my closet. My medical school fund, my escape plan, my middle finger to everyone who said I wasn't good enough. Meanwhile, Michael was living his best life. My parents signed him up for a $2,000 MCAT prep course. They hired Dr. Patricia Hammond, a former admissions committee member, to help craft his personal statement and applications. They budgeted $3,000 for application fees across 15 different schools. I watched them fuss over his essay drafts, help him research schools, drive him to practice interviews. My dad took time off work to tour campuses with him. My mom bought him a suit for interviews and took hundreds of photos of him looking professional and doctor-like. And me. I was studying for the MCAT with a used prep book I'd bought for $15 at a garage sale, watching free YouTube videos in the staff break room at GUSEPS during my 10-minute breaks. The funny thing was, Michael wasn't even that excited about medical school. I'd hear him on the phone with friends, complaining about how much work it was, how competitive everything was, how he wasn't sure he even wanted to be a doctor but felt like he had to because it was the family plan. Me. I was living and breathing this dream. Every biology lecture felt like a gift. Every chemistry problem was a puzzle I genuinely wanted to solve. When I tutored those underclassmen and saw their faces light up when they finally understood photosynthesis or cellular respiration, I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to spend my life helping people understand their own bodies, helping them heal. December came, and it was MCAT time. Michael was stressed beyond belief, even with all his expensive prep. He was having panic attacks, staying up all night cramming, convinced he was going to fail despite having every advantage handed to him. I took the test on a Saturday morning after working a double shift at the restaurant the night before. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. But when I sat down in that testing center, something clicked. All those late-night study sessions, all those YouTube videos watched on my phone during breaks, all those tutoring sessions where I'd had to explain concepts in 10 different ways, it all came together. I walked out of that testing center knowing I'd nailed it. Michael's score came back first, 505. Not terrible, but not great. Definitely not good enough for the top-tier schools he was applying to. My parents were disappointed but tried to stay positive. "It's fine," my dad said. "Your personal statement and extracurriculars will make up for it." My score came back a week later, 520. I stared at that number on my laptop screen in disbelief. 520. That was 95th percentile. That was competitive for anywhere, including the top schools in the country. I didn't tell anyone. By January, I'd saved enough money to apply to 10 schools. Not the 15 Michael was applying to, but 10 solid programs that I'd researched carefully. I wrote my personal statement in the back room of GUSEPS during slow nights, crafting and recrafting every sentence on my phone. I wrote about growing up fascinated by the invisible world of science, about the night I snuck into my brother's room to look through his microscope, about the moment I realized I wanted to understand how bodies worked and how to fix them when they broke. I wrote about working 3 jobs to pay for my applications, about the determination that came from being told I wasn't good enough. I didn't write about my family. I didn't write about being dismissed or overlooked. This essay was about me, about my passion, about my future. They didn't deserve to be part of that story. Submitting those applications was terrifying and exhilarating. Every click of the submit button felt like a small act of rebellion. Every application fee I paid with money I'd earned myself felt like proof that I could do this alone. February and March were agony. Michael started hearing back from schools, a few interviews, but mostly rejections. My parents were getting worried. "Maybe we should have applied to more safety schools," my mom would say. "Maybe the competition is just too intense this year." I was getting emails too, but I checked them privately, on my phone, during breaks at work. And slowly, impossibly, wonderfully, the interviews started coming. University of Pittsburgh wanted to interview me, then Emory, then Northwestern, then, and I had to read this email 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins, the school Michael had called his dream school since sophomore year of high school. The school he'd written his essay about, the the program he'd researched obsessively, the place he'd imagined himself for years. They wanted to interview me. I scheduled all my interviews during weekends or school breaks, telling my parents I was picking up extra shifts at work. I bought a single professional outfit from a consignment shop and wore it to every interview, washing it carefully between trips. The interviews went better than I could have dreamed. Admissions committees were impressed by my work ethic, my genuine passion for medicine, my unique perspective as someone who'd funded her own education. They asked about my research interests, my long-term goals, my understanding of healthcare disparities. At Johns Hopkins, the interviewer spent 20 minutes asking about my tutoring work and how it had shaped my teaching philosophy. "We need more physicians who can communicate complex ideas clearly," she said. "That's a skill you can't teach in medical school. You either have it or you don't." March turned into April. Michael's interviews weren't going well. He came home from each one looking defeated, complaining that the questions were too hard, that he didn't know how to talk about his research experience because he didn't really have any meaningful research experience. "They asked me why I wanted to be a doctor," he told my parents after one particularly bad interview. "And I couldn't give them a good answer. I mean, I know I'm supposed to want to help people, but everyone says that." My parents were trying to stay supportive, but I could see the worry creeping in. Their golden boy, their chosen one, wasn't performing the way they'd expected. Then the acceptance letters started coming. The first one arrived on a Tuesday in late April. University of Pittsburgh. I opened the email in the parking lot of GUSEPS before my shift, and when I saw "Congratulations," I started crying right there in my car. I'd done it. Someone wanted me. Someone believed in me. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, more acceptances rolled in. Emory, Northwestern, University of Michigan. Each email felt like validation, like proof that I wasn't crazy, that I did belong in medical school, that all those hours of work and sacrifice had been worth it. Michael, meanwhile, was getting rejection after rejection. His confidence was crumbling. My parents were starting to panic, talking about gap years and backup plans. Then, on a Friday afternoon in early May, the email I'd been waiting for finally arrived. "Dear Miss Daniels, congratulations. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine." I stopped reading after that first sentence and just stared at my phone screen. Johns Hopkins, the school that had rejected Michael without even offering him an interview. They wanted me, but that wasn't even the best part. I kept reading. "We are also pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of our Rural Health Diversity Scholarship, which will cover your full tuition for all 4 years of medical school, plus a living stipend." A full ride. They were giving me a full ride to Johns Hopkins. I sat in my car in the GUSEPS parking lot, holding my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Not only had I gotten into medical school, I'd gotten into one of the best medical schools in the country. With a full scholarship, everything my parents said was impossible had just become reality. And the best part, they had no idea. For weeks, I kept the news to myself. I went to work, came home, did homework, pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was buzzing with this secret knowledge, this incredible truth that was going to change everything. I knew I had to tell them eventually, but I wanted to choose the moment carefully. I wanted it to be perfect. That's when I found out about the reception. The invitation arrived in my email on a Wednesday in June. The University of Maryland Medical School and Johns Hopkins School of Medicine cordially invite you and your family to attend the annual Future Physicians Reception, celebrating our incoming class of 2029. It was perfect. Better than perfect. It was like the universe had handed me the exact scenario I'd been dreaming about for months. The reception was designed to honor incoming medical students from our area, with special recognition for scholarship recipients and outstanding applicants. There would be faculty members, current medical students, families, and a formal presentation highlighting notable achievements from the incoming class. And according to the email, I was going to be specifically recognized as the recipient of the Rural Health Diversity Scholarship to Johns Hopkins, one of only 3 full-ride scholarships awarded that year across both programs. I RSVP'd for 4 people, myself and 3 family members. For the next 2 weeks, I planned everything carefully. I told my parents that the local university was hosting some kind of pre-med information session and that Michael might find it helpful for reapplying next year. I suggested they all come to show support for his future plans. It's probably good networking, I said casually over dinner. You know, meet some local doctors, maybe get some advice for Michael's next application cycle. My parents thought it was sweet that I was trying to help my brother. They agreed to come, pleased that I was finally being supportive of Michael's medical school dreams. The morning of the reception, I woke up early and drove to campus ahead of time. I needed to pick up my materials, do a quick run-through with the event coordinators, and most importantly, get my white coat. That's right. They were giving all the incoming students white coats as part of the ceremony. Short white coats with our names embroidered on them, just like real medical students wear. When the coordinator handed me mine, I almost started crying right there in the campus center. Alexandra Daniels, it read in neat blue script. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, class of 2026. I put the coat on and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. For the first time in my life, I looked like what I'd always known I could become. I looked like someone who belonged in this world, someone who deserved to be here. The reception was scheduled to start at 4 p.m. I arrived at 3:30, checked in with the coordinators, and found a quiet corner where I could watch the entrance. My hands were shaking, partly from nerves, partly from excitement, partly from the sheer magnitude of what was about to happen. At exactly 4:15, I saw them walk through the main doors. My parents were dressed nicely, my mom in the navy dress she wore to church, my dad in the suit he'd bought for Michael's high school graduation. And Michael was there too, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, clearly not thrilled to be spending his Saturday afternoon at what he thought was a boring pre-med information session. They looked around the decorated ballroom, taking in the fancy setup, the professional banners, the tables full of medical school brochures and information packets. I could see my mom whispering to my dad, probably commenting on how nice everything looked. They found seats near the middle of the room, just like I'd hoped they would. Perfect view of the main presentation screen, but far enough back that they wouldn't immediately spot me in the crowd. At 4:30, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Dean of Student Affairs from University of Maryland, stepped up to the microphone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our annual Future Physicians reception. Today, we're here to celebrate some truly exceptional young people who represent the future of medicine in our community. I watched my parents straighten up in their seats, probably assuming they were about to hear about opportunities for Michael to get involved with next year. Before we begin our formal presentations, I'd like to invite all of our incoming medical students to please stand and be recognized. Around the room, about 30 young people stood up. I was one of them, standing near the back corner, still mostly hidden from my family's view. My parents clapped politely, probably thinking these were current medical students or maybe local doctors. Michael was checking his phone, barely paying attention. These remarkable individuals represent acceptances to medical schools across the country, Dr. Walsh continued. From our own University of Maryland program to prestigious institutions like Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, and more. I saw my dad's head perk up at the mention of Johns Hopkins. That had been Michael's dream school, after all. Today, we want to especially recognize a few standout achievements from this exceptional group. First, I'd like to acknowledge our 3 full scholarship recipients. The room quieted down. Full scholarships to medical school were rare and impressive, and everyone knew it. Our first scholarship recipient is James Chen, who received the Merit Scholarship to Harvard Medical School. Applause filled the room. I watched my parents clap, looking impressed but not particularly invested. Our second scholarship recipient is Maria Santos, who received the Diversity Leadership Scholarship to Stanford Medical School. More applause. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone around me could hear it. And our third scholarship recipient, Dr. Walsh paused for effect, and I swear the entire room held its breath, is Alexandra Daniels, who received the Rural Health Diversity Scholarship to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. For a moment, nothing happened. The room erupted in applause, but my family just sat there, frozen. I watched my mother's face change from polite attention to confusion to something that looked almost like panic. She was looking around the room, probably thinking she'd misheard, probably wondering if there was another Alexandra Daniels somewhere. My father was staring straight ahead, his mouth slightly open, processing what he'd just heard. Michael was the first one to spot me. He was looking around the room like my parents were, trying to locate this mysterious Alexandra Daniels, when his eyes landed on me standing in the back corner, in my white coat, with my name tag clearly visible. He blinked hard, like he was trying to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Then he grabbed my mother's arm and pointed toward me. The look on her face when she saw me will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was confusion, shock, disbelief, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Like she was seeing a ghost, or like reality had just shifted in a way that didn't make sense to her. "Miss Daniels, would you please come forward?" Dr. Walsh called from the podium. The crowd was still applauding. People were turning to look at me, smiling, congratulating me as I walked toward the front of the room. But all I could focus on was my family. My mother was shaking her head slightly, like she was trying to wake up from a dream. My father was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like he was looking at a complete stranger. And Michael just looked defeated. I walked up to the podium, shook Dr. Walsh's hand, and accepted a certificate recognizing my scholarship. The photographer took pictures. People clapped. Dr. Walsh said wonderful things about my academic achievements, my work ethic, and my commitment to serving underserved communities. Through it all, I kept glancing back at my family. They looked like they were watching a movie about someone else's life. When the formal presentations ended, there was a reception with refreshments and mingling. Faculty members came up to congratulate me. Other students introduced themselves. Parents of other medical students shook my hand and told me how impressed they were. But my own family stayed in their seats, just staring at me from across the room. Finally, after about 20 minutes of avoiding the inevitable, I walked over to them. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for coming." My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alexandra. I don't understand. How are you? What is this?" "I'm starting medical school at Johns Hopkins in August," I said simply. "Full scholarship." My father was shaking his head slowly. But we didn't. You didn't apply to medical school. We talked about this. We agreed that Michael. You agreed that Michael would apply to medical school, I corrected gently. I never agreed to give up on my dreams. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, other families were celebrating, taking pictures, talking excitedly about the future. But our little corner of the room felt frozen in time. Michael was the first to find his voice. "How?" he asked. "How did you pay for applications? How did you study for the MCAT? How did you?" "I worked," I said. 3 jobs, I saved every dollar. I studied with library books and YouTube videos. I did it myself. My mother's eyes were filling with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of pride or shame or something else entirely. "Your MCAT score," my father said quietly. "What was your MCAT score?" 520. The number hung in the air between us. Michael's 505 suddenly seemed very small in comparison. "And you got into," my mother started, then stopped, like she couldn't bring herself to say the name of the school. "Johns Hopkins, yes, along with University of Pittsburgh, Northwestern, Emory, and University of Michigan." Each school name was like a small explosion. These were the schools Michael had dreamed about, applied to, been rejected from. "But why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, and for the first time his voice cracked a little. "Why didn't you tell us you were applying?" I looked at all 3 of them, my parents who had never believed in me, my brother who had never stood up for me, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Because you told me not to waste money on applications that weren't likely to succeed," I said quietly. "Because you told me to be realistic about my chances. Because you told me I didn't have the mind for medicine." The words weren't angry or bitter. They were just true. My mother covered her face with her hands. My father stared down at his shoes. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. "We were wrong," my mother whispered through her fingers. "Oh, honey, we were so wrong." But I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I wasn't looking for validation or recognition or praise. I'd found all of that on my own. "I need to go mingle," I said, adjusting my white coat. "Thanks for coming to support me." As I walked away, I heard my father call after me. "Alexandra, wait." But I didn't turn around. I walked toward the group of other incoming medical students, toward my new classmates, toward my future. Behind me, I could hear my mother quietly crying and Michael trying to comfort her. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. The aftermath was complicated. My parents spent the drive home in complete silence, according to Michael, who texted me later that night. My mother cried. My father kept shaking his head and muttering about how they'd completely missed it. Michael said he'd never seen them look so shaken. Over the next few days, they tried to process what had happened. My mother called me 3 times, leaving voicemails that were half apology, half disbelief. Honey, I can't believe we didn't know. I can't believe you did all of this alone. I'm so proud of you, but I'm also so sorry we weren't there for you. My father sent me a long email, the first time he'd ever written to me about anything serious. He talked about how they'd made assumptions, how they'd let their own biases cloud their judgment, how they'd failed me as parents. He ended with, I know we can't undo the past, but I hope you'll let us be proud of you now. But the person I felt most sorry for was Michael. The truth was, he'd never asked to be the chosen one. He'd never asked to carry all their hopes and dreams. He'd just been a kid who was decent at science, and somehow that had snowballed into this massive expectation that he'd become a doctor. When I really thought about it, the pressure my parents had put on him was just as unfair as the way they'd dismissed me. He'd spent years trying to live up to an image of himself that he'd never really connected with. A week after the reception, he came to my room and knocked on the door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in, and we sat on my bed like we used to when we were kids and one of us had gotten in trouble. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I know I should have said something all those times Mom and Dad were. You know, all those times they acted like you weren't as smart as me. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared that if I spoke up, they'd realize I wasn't as smart as they thought either. I'd been angry at Michael for years, but sitting there looking at him, I realized he'd been just as trapped by our parents' expectations as I had been. I never wanted to be a doctor, he continued. I mean, I thought I did, because everyone kept telling me I should be one. But when I was sitting in those interviews, trying to explain why I wanted to study medicine, I couldn't come up with a good answer because I don't think I really do. He was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with something that looked like admiration. But you do. You've always known exactly what you wanted, and you went after it even when no one believed in you. That's incredible, Alex. We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. He told me he was thinking about taking a gap year, maybe exploring some other interests. Photography, maybe, or graphic design. Things he'd always been drawn to but never pursued because they weren't practical enough for our parents. I told him about the night shifts at GUSEPS, about studying on my phone between tables, about the moment I opened that first acceptance letter. I told him how lonely it had been, doing it all alone, but also how empowering it was to know I'd done it myself. By the time he left my room, we felt like siblings again. Real siblings, not competitors in some game we'd never agreed to play. My parents have tried to make up for lost time. They want to pay for my medical school expenses, even though I have a full scholarship. They want to throw me a graduation party, buy me equipment, help me move to Baltimore. They're trying so hard to be supportive now that it's almost overwhelming. But here's the thing, I don't need their support anymore. I spent 18 years learning how to believe in myself when no one else would. I learned how to work for what I want, how to advocate for myself, how to turn doubt into fuel. Those are skills you can't buy with tutoring sessions or MCAT prep courses. Those are skills that will make me a better doctor, a stronger person, a more compassionate human being. Medical school starts in 6 weeks. I've already found an apartment near Johns Hopkins, already connected with my future classmates, already started preparing for the intensity of the next 4 years. Sometimes I think about that 7-year-old girl sneaking into her brother's room to look through a microscope, wondering about the invisible world of science. She was right to be curious. She was right to want more. She was right to believe that she could figure out how bodies work and how to fix them when they break. My parents told me I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor, but I didn't become one to prove them wrong. I'm becoming one because I always knew I could. I did it because late at night, when I was studying by the light of my phone in the break room at GUSEPS, I could picture myself in a white coat, helping patients understand their diagnoses, making discoveries that could save lives. Proving them wrong, that was just the bonus. In 4 years, Dr. Alexandra Daniels will have a nice ring to it, don't you think? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to share this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more incredible revenge stories coming your way.